Chapter 11 of Brenda, Her School, and Her Club. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brenda, Her School, and Her Club by Helen Leah Reed. Chapter 11, The Cooking Class. Nora's cooking party was not altogether a pleasure affair. It was the result of her father's desire that she should have some knowledge of domestic matters before she left school. Dr. Gostar was a busy man, having little time to spend with his children. His practice was large, but as he gave his services as willingly to poor as to rich people, he had not accumulated much money. Nora's home, however, was a very pleasant one. The numerous members of the family used all the rooms with the greatest freedom. As the four other members of the household, besides Dr. and Mrs. Gostar and Nora, were boys, the furnishings of the house had a well-worn, comfortable look. No one was kept out of any particular room. The boys had a large play and workroom in the attic, but when they wished to sit in the library, which other people might have called a drawing room, they were not forbidden. Mrs. Gostar, though fond of society, was never too busy to hear what her children had to say, to read to them, or hear them tell about their school, or to sympathize with them in any way. She had agreed with Dr. Gostar when he had expressed a wish to have Nora learn cooking. "I am anxious," he had said, "that my little daughter shall know how to cook. I have been so often in houses where wives and mothers have been quite helpless when a cook left, that I should be very sorry to have Nora grow up as ignorant as they. I know that a great deal of sickness comes from eating badly prepared food." Nora herself had been rather pleased at the prospect of learning to cook, but Belle thought it very vulgar, and for a time was not sure whether or not she would join the cooking class. During the first winter the girls had had lessons once a week, but through this season of Julia's arrival in Boston, they had met to practice cooking only once a month. The lessons always were given at Nora's house, because, as Edith said, her cook wasn't too fashionable to let them fuss around in the kitchen. The first winter they had had a teacher, but this year they were supposed to know enough to concoct certain dishes themselves. The cooking party took place on the third Friday of the month, and from 6 to 8 the girls were busy cooking. At 8 o'clock any guests whom they had invited arrived, and at 9 o'clock they had a little supper. They were not permitted to have too elaborate a bill of fare. Even as it was, Belle's grandmother protested against what she called an indigestible supper served at this hour. As a matter of fact, it was not apt to be indigestible. Dr. Gostar himself usually made out the list of edibles. Light salads, simple cakes, bouillon, ices, blanc manges, jellies, oysters, or eggs cooked in various styles, and chocolate prepared with whipped cream were conspicuous on the list from which he made his selection. But the girls on any given evening were restricted to one sweet, one solid, and 2 kinds of cake. With the assistance of a maid, each girl in turn set the table, and sometimes, besides their young friends, their parents were present to see what their skill and taste had accomplished. "There, there, Edith, I'm sure your cake is burning," cried Nora, on the Friday evening after their talk with Philip. "Oh, dear, I can't do anything about it now, I've cut my fingers," and Edith held up her hands rather plaintively. "Here, take my handkerchief," said Brenda, and before Edith could stop her she was binding up the wound with a delicate lace-trimmed handkerchief. It was Agnes's birthday present to her, sent from Paris, and intended only for full dress occasion. "Why, Brenda, that lovely handkerchief!" exclaimed Belle, who was looking on. "Oh, it won't hurt it. How does your finger feel, Edith?" "It feels all right, for it wasn't a deep cut, but with my right hand tied up I don't believe I could lift that cake out of the oven," and Edith looked about helplessly, for she was not used to battling with difficulties. Over her dress each girl wore a long-sleeved blue checked apron, each of them, at least except Julia. This was her first appearance at the cooking club, and as Brenda had forgotten to tell her about the aprons, she was unprepared. She had on a small white apron, borrowed from Nora, and when Edith spoke about the cake, she seized a holder, and opening the oven door, lifted the pan out. As Edith feared, the cake was burned, though not the whole top, but black spots here and there gave it a very unsightly appearance, and Edith felt very much disturbed as she looked at it. "How provoking! That was the only cake we were to have tonight, and there isn't time to make another." "Oh, we can do something," cried Julia. "Let me help you." "I don't see what we can do," half moaned Edith. "I'll show you," cried Julia hopefully. "You have plenty of sugar and eggs and but really there isn't time to make anything, not to speak of baking it, and oh dear, I am so unlucky," sighed poor Edith. "Nonsense," said Julia. "You haven't any idea what I can do. I shall just have to show you." And she began to break the eggs into a bowl, beating them and stirring into them a liberal amount of sugar. "Run, Brenda," she cried, "and bring me a sheet of that brown wrapping paper." Brenda obeyed, and after buttering the paper, Julia dropped her mixture of sugar and eggs, a spoonful at a time, here and there on the paper. "Oh, I know," cried Brenda. "Kisses. But I never would have thought of it myself." "Well," responded Julia, "there is nothing you can bake so quickly, and almost everyone likes them. There, this first batch must be ready now," and she opened the oven door to remove the pan with its sheet of kisses, delicately browned and the size and shape that a confectioner could not surpass. 2 or 3 other lots were baked before there were enough. By the time they were finished, Edith's finger had ceased to pain her, and she was helping place the other eatables on the dumbwaiter. From the floor above there came the sound of laughter, and the voices of the boys could be heard mingled with those of the girls, as they called to the 3 kitchen maidens. At last, with the help of Hannah, the maid, who had come down from the floor above, all the kitchen work was declared at an end. "That's all," shouted Brenda, as Belle and Philip gave a final pull on the cords of the dumbwaiter. A moment later Edith and Julia and Brenda entered the dining room, with faces perhaps a little flushed, but otherwise looking very unlike the 3 cooks they had been a few minutes before. Under Nora's direction the dining table had been exquisitely arranged. There was a great glass bowl of pink roses in the center, and the plates and cups were of china with a wild rose border. The candles in the silver candelabra at each end of the table had pink shades. "There you go, Philip, and tell the others that supper is ready," said Nora, glancing at the table and giving a final touch to 1 or 2 dishes. With Philip leading, the guests trooped into the dining room. Trooped is perhaps too boisterous a word to apply to the procession of young people who came into the room 2 at a time, with a fair amount of dignity. To Julia, in fact, they appeared to a certain extent to be imitating the demeanor of their elders. She could not help thinking that the manner with which Belle let herself be led to a chair was entirely too coquettish, and only Nora seemed to be her real self in the presence of the guests. But Julia was not a harsh critic, and before very long she forgot that she had not always known these merry young people. She laughed at the jokes made by the boys, although she did not always see the point of them. Most of these jokes turned on something connected with college, for every one of them was in Harvard, although some were only freshmen. The stories that they thought the funniest dealt with the queer things that some of their friends had had to do when undergoing initiation into one of the college societies, and many of their doings seemed really inane. Before they had been long in the dining room, Mrs. Gostar joined them, and later Dr. Gostar himself appeared. The presence of these elder people lessened the laughter only a very little, for all the young people knew that Dr. Gostar enjoyed fun as well as they. "What was the catastrophe tonight?" he asked Nora, for it was a favorite joke of his that at each meeting of the cooking class some dish suffered. When he had heard about the disaster to Edith's cake, he praised Julia so heartily for having come to the rescue that she blushed deeply. Even without this success in cooking, Julia would have been voted a great addition to the cooking class. There was something very pleasing in her gentle manners, and Belle, to her surprise, found herself growing a little jealous of Brenda's cousin. Before this she had not thought her sufficiently important to arouse jealousy. End of chapter 11. Read today by Deborah Knight from the state of Illinois, February 8th, 2011.